One Verizon time. And you've already slept an hour longer than normal. You ought to really be sharp this morning. No naps today. You already had extra sleep last night. We want to make sure everybody gets a copy, at least one per family, if we're able to. Jennifer is passing out some stuff that has to do with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, which is my family's passion project, and it is my full-time ministry now. And I don't want to have to talk about it a lot because I want us to study the Bible. And so I'm going to ask you to just take one of those welcome sheets that have been distributed, and you can learn about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry with that 8.5 by 11 sheet that says welcome on the top. Does anybody need one of those? Anybody not get one of those? We do. Oh, we still do. Jennifer, can you check? There were some, here are some extras. Here are some leftovers. If you did not get a welcome sheet, then please let Jennifer get you one. And there was a need right here. What that welcome sheet does is it explains to you about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry and what it's all about and what it's not entirely about. And let me ask you, for the sake of time, to jump into Psalm 31. Because we didn't come here to talk about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. We came here to study the Bible. And so please turn to Psalm 31. Anybody here ever experienced something in their life that was overwhelming? Something in your life, it was an experience that was so significant, had such an impact on you that you felt overwhelmed. Anybody? Okay, so not all of you have lived a dream life, huh? So there have been some people who have been through some very difficult times. Give me an example of a difficult life experience that might cause a person to feel overwhelmed. Yeah, the loss of a job. Can you imagine being Clyde Grimmett? He was an employee of Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio. Akron, Ohio for years was known as the rubber capital of the world. All the rubber companies had their headquarters there. And Clyde Grimmett worked there for 39 years. He was a high-level accountant for that company. One day they came in and they said, Clyde, we're moving your job down to Nashville. Bridgestone, the Japanese, had bought Firestone. And he said, well, I don't want to go to Nashville. And they said, we don't want you to go to Nashville either. He didn't retire, he was retired. And during the 39 years he was there, to a great extent, his identity was he was a high-level accountant for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, and they dumped him. They kicked him to the curb. Do you think he grieved? Do you think he was maybe a tad angry about that? Well, my oldest daughter, happens to be a high-level accountant at Bridgestone in Nashville. And she said, Dad, and she knew Clyde because Clyde was a member of the church where I preached for 33 years, Hartville, Ohio, Hartville Church of Christ. My daughter Michelle said, man, when they kicked Clyde out, accounting was a mess. They did not adequately train somebody to come in and take over Clyde's job. And so after they let him go, a few months later, they come and make contact with him and say, Clyde, we'd like to have you come back and help us out because things are not going real smoothly. What do you think he said? Ain't no way, Jose. You're exactly right. He said, N-O, exclamation mark, capital letters. It ain't happening. My daughter said after that, things continued to deteriorate. And then Clyde tells me this part of the story. He said, Dean, they came back to me a second time, and they said, Clyde, what will it take to get you to come back and help us for a few months? He said, Dean, I named a number I knew they would not match, and they matched it. And he grinned like a Cheshire cat when he told me that. He was overwhelmed by the loss of his job that had become, in his mind, to a great extent, his personal identity. Give me another life experience where you might feel overwhelmed. Loss of a parent. You lived all those years with a parent. And in the course of living all those years with a parent, you cultivated a relationship. In many ways, they displayed their love for you. Though they are flawed, all parents are that way. You know, the only problem with growing up is you have to grow up with flawed parents. And flawed parents have flawed kids. But even though there are some occasional setbacks and stressors, you grow so close, at least we should, child to parent. And the typical thing that happens is we lose our parents. And that can be pretty overwhelming. But then also for the parent sometimes, they can lose their child. And you talk about abnormal and unnatural and unfair and brutal. You're supposed to bury your parents. You're not supposed to be burying your children. Imagine how overwhelming that would be. Give me another life experience where you might feel overwhelmed. When somebody has violated your trust. Let me tell you why I think, and it's nothing but a personal opinion, because this is a judgment about the motive of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 9, where he mentions about except for fornication or sexual immorality, in regard to divorcing and marrying again, why in the world would that one thing, that one sin, why did that one sin get picked out as the exception? Because that kind of violation of trust is like sticking a chunk of dynamite in the foundation of a relationship and lighting that dynamite. It blows it up. The vast majority of people who experience that kind of violation are not going to be able to handle that. I think that's the reason why that sin was picked out. If it wasn't for that reason, the point that I just made is true, a violation of trust. Let me tell you about a lady I met at the Fort Mill Church. Fort Mill, South Carolina, is a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. She came up and told me a little bit about her story. She expressed appreciation for the workshop that we were doing. And then she proceeded to explain to me a little bit about her story. And in her story, she told me about the day that her husband came to her. And her husband informed her that his mistress was going to give birth the next day. I said, "Did you slap him?" She said, "I did in my mind." And she strategically picked out a time, a day and a time, when she knew he wasn't going to be there. Solicited the help of her parents, her father, an elder in the Lord's church. And in his absence, they all came in and as quickly as could removed all of the items from the house that belonged to her and the kids. They had 2 boys, age about 8 or 9. There are things that can happen in our life that can just be blow-me-away experiences and cause us to feel so overwhelmed. And if we're going to experience those kinds of things, this would be a really good thing to know, what we ought to do when we're overwhelmed. Mention was made about reading the Bible, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at Psalm 31, if you've not turned to it yet, and I'm going to ask you to follow along with me, and I'm going to ask you to even think out loud together with me, as we've already done. I want to encourage you to continue to do that, because you may see some things I don't. Now, When you think about the Psalms, what person do you think about most frequently? David. What do we know about David? What's the most impressive thing? What most people, when they hear that name David, and it's a reference to the David in the Bible, what do we immediately think about in regard to how he's described? Twice. A man after God's own heart. So this is not your garden variety follower of God. This is not a nominal believer. This is a man who twice was mentioned in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. I need us to remember that what we're about to read are the words of a man who is no average, ordinary Joe. He was a devoted follower and worshiper of God. Could it be possible that such an amazing, awesome, spiritual giant could be so impacted in his life by some circumstances that he would write something like this? I want to ask you to take a look at this psalm and pick up at verse 9. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. Now remember, you're reading poetry. This is Hebrew poetry. Now when I was a kid in school, I hated poetry. I was so frustrated sometimes reading poetry, and I just thought, why don't these people who write poetry just say what they mean instead of using all these allegories and these metaphors? So remember that this is poetic language. Watch how, using metaphors, figures of speech, how he describes how he's doing in his life. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. My eye wastes away with grief. Why do we grieve? What causes us to grieve? Loss. Loss of something really important to us. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Matthew 6:21. Our heart follows our treasure. Whenever something or someone has become close to our heart, and we lose that something or someone, it's going to have an impact on us. We're going to grieve. Pick up at verse 10. For my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing, and my strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. Whew, isn't that a powerful figure of speech? My bones waste away. Verse 11. I'm a reproach among all my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and am repulsive to my acquaintances, and those who see me outside flee from me. Now watch this. This is the most powerful statement, I think, in this section. I am forgotten like a dead man, out of mind. I am like a broken vessel. Are you kidding me? A man after God's own heart, who had a close walk with the Lord. He was experiencing intimacy with the creator of the universe, the Father in heaven. How in the world could he possibly feel so bad? I am like a broken vessel, for I hear the slander of many. Fear is on every side while they take counsel together against me. They scheme to take away my life. You mean to tell me a spiritual giant could experience something in their life that would cause them to feel like that? Are you kidding me? No. David is not kidding us. That's exactly how he felt. If we're a mess because of something that we're experiencing in our life, and we keep telling people who ask us, how are you doing? Fine, okay, I'm here. Do you think you're going to be receiving the compassion and the love of God through the people that He's blessed you with if they're clueless about what a train wreck you are? Could we please be a little bit more honest, a little bit more transparent about how we're doing when people ask, how are you today? Especially if those people are aware of the fact that something significant has happened in your life. If you've been diagnosed with a life-altering or life-threatening disease, if you have experienced the loss of your house by a fire or a flood, if you in your personal life have lost somebody very close, a parent or a child or a spouse, David did not have any problem being transparent about what was going on in his life, and he wasn't seeking pity. God help us be more transparent about what's going on in our life. That's what the family of God is to a great extent about. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about us caring for one another. As individual members, all a part of a body, caring for one another. How can I actively care for you if you keep telling me you're okay? And you're withholding information about what's going on in your life. I'm not suggesting that all the time with everyone you spill your guts. I'm just saying that we could be a little bit more transparent, and it might help all of us if we were. David had no problem admitting the fact that he felt like he was drowning, submerged. That is a synonym for the word overwhelmed or crushed. He was being crushed by the heaviness of the burdens that he was bearing in his life. He felt like he was drowning. You know, I thought just recently, for some reason, I don't know why, if I were to die, what's the worst way I'd want to die? Drowning to me would be, I've kind of decided for me it'd probably be drowning. He was a mess. He was a train wreck. And he was very free in admitting that. And it wasn't just an ordinary believer. Remember, it was David, a man after God's own heart. Let's not be so naive as to think that people of great faith don't struggle mightily. Shepherds in the Lord's church, the Bible study teacher that you had that you admired most, the preacher, your parents. Human beings in a broken world are going to experience things that are going to cause them to be overwhelmed. It's inevitable. It's just a question of what's it going to be. And how many times is that going to happen in the course of my life? What should we do? Do what David did. Look here, look at Psalm 31, look at the first verse. In you, O Lord, I put my trust. Now, another translation says, in you, O Lord, I take my refuge. Whenever a storm of life is threatening our peace and security and welfare, when we're experiencing any kind of a storm in our life, and I'm not talking about meteorological, I'm talking about life storms. The troubles, the trials, the losses. Imagine this. Miss Kelly, your church secretary, she hears about a tornado warning, and I don't know if you all have this, but let's say you have a mass emailing system with the church or a mass texting, and Kelly hears on the radio about this tornado warning. So she shoots out an email or a mass text and says, there's a tornado coming, everybody go to the nearest mobile home park for refuge. Think that'd be a very good idea? But sometimes we human beings pick a refuge that's inadequate and frankly not much help at all. The best refuge, unparalleled, secure refuge in any storm in your life is the Lord. In you, O Lord, I put my trust, or I take my refuge. Now, notice how he really emphasizes this. Drop down to verse 6. I've hated those who regard useless idols, but I trust in the Lord. And then drop down a little bit further to verse 14. But as for me, I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. I got this. That's what I hear sometimes people say. I got this. If that's how you're going to handle a stormy time in your life, in what have you taken refuge? Yourself. Do you know everything? Do you have unsearchable wisdom? Do you have no weakness at all? Do you have total power? You don't, but God does. When we trust in ourselves, that would be like going to a mobile home park when you have a tornado warning. It is foolish. Instead of saying, I got this, there's a much better, more humble, and more sure way of viewing things. God has got this, and I have got God, and this is going to be okay. I have no idea when, and I don't know how in the world, but it is going to be okay because God's got this and I've got God. See how different that perspective is than the prideful declaration, I've got this. Well, verse 5 gives us a little explanation of what trusting is all about. Now, usually we think about this in reference to Jesus hanging on the cross, but David was the first one to say it. Verse 5 of this psalm, into your hand I commit my spirit. That's what trust is. It's taking who you are and all that you are and everything that you are, and you lay it in the hollow of the hand of Almighty God. There is no more security than right there. Everything that you are and everything that you have. Probably the most familiar passage in the Proverbs is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. That passage tells us what we ought to do, trust. In whom we ought to trust, the Lord. How we ought to do that, with all of our heart. And A-L-L means A-L-L. Nothing held back. And it tells us what that means. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and let Him direct your paths. What is the heart plea of a person who truly trusts God when they are really struggling in their life? What is the sincere petition and plea of a trusting heart? Well, I'll show you. Look at the end of verse 3. Look at what David does. He cries out to God, and he says, lead me and guide me. That's trust. You're not leaning on your own understanding. You don't know everything. Have you ever met anybody who claimed that they knew everything, or at least acted like they knew everything? I've met a few of those people. I hope none of them are sitting in this room, but there are people who are kind of that way. They just think they know everything. Let me tell you the reality. Nobody knows everything about anything. That is literally true. Nobody knows everything about anything. We all have way more ignorance than we have knowledge. And we all have a severe deficiency of wisdom. And wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Do we innately, naturally always see something the way God sees it? The answer to the question is no. We don't. because we don't know everything about anything. And we don't even know everything about this book that has several pages in it. It is like mining in a mine for ore, and the seam is endless. You never get to the point where you know it all. Now, would we be so humble as to admit the fact it is not always easy to trust the Lord? Now, we know we should. Hopefully, we know we should. But will we admit that we can be such a mess mentally, emotionally, and spiritually because of adverse circumstances we're experiencing that we might find it hard to trust the Lord? I'm a big fan of a young lady who sings faith-based songs. Her name is Lauren Daigle. And she sings a song titled Trust in You. I will save you the melody because I can't sing it like her. But let me read you some lyrics from that song. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Yes, it's hard sometimes to trust. It can be a real struggle, trusting. But David knew, because he was a man after God's own heart, though severely, severely injured by whatever circumstances and he doesn't tell us, he doesn't give us details about what the circumstances were. He knew that the key to him navigating this storm and getting to the other side was trusting in the Lord. One of the blessings that comes from storms in our life is we have a come to Jesus meeting. That's what my daughter calls it. We have a time in our life when we are reminded of, in a in-your-face way, I need the Lord. We sing that song, I need thee, oh I need thee, every hour I need thee. It is so easy to sing that song. We know the melody. We've sung the lyrics many times. But how passionately and how sincerely do we sing that song? Who are the people who sing that song with greatest passion? People who are in a storm, because they've been reminded by their experiences, oh, I need thee, every hour I need thee. Can you imagine that? A great blessing coming through great adversity. Now, though he was a mess, what really is impressive about this guy is he saw positives when he's in agony. When you look at that section we started out reading in verse 9 through 13, I mean, he is a mess. But you know, a lot of times what can happen with us, and it happened with Job, as good a man as Job was, and we talked about this on Friday and on Saturday in the workshop, as great a man as Job was, you know what his greatest sign of weakness was? He let his burdens blind him to his blessings. He said his life was full of trouble when his life was not full of trouble. He had abundant, priceless blessings in his life, but he wasn't feeling it. And he permitted his burdens to blind him to his blessings. David didn't let that happen. David says what he did was he praised the Lord. Look at this, verse 19. Oh, how great is your goodness. Can you imagine a man who just told us in verses 9 through 13, he's such a train wreck, and now he's declaring something so positive without any hesitation. He holds nothing back. Oh, how great is your goodness, which you have laid up for those who fear you, which you have prepared for those who trust in you. in the presence of the sons of men. Drop down to verse 21. Again, he breaks out and prays and says, blessed be the Lord, for he's shown me his marvelous kindness in a strong city. I'm going to ask you to go back to English class. Some of you probably slept through it. But I'm going to ask you to look at these two verses, 19 and 21. In 19, there's a reference to the goodness of God. In 21, there's a reference to kindness. Some translations use the word mercy. What are the modifiers of those two characteristics? What's the modifier of goodness? Great! Oh, how great is your goodness! How comforting is it? How uplifting is it to know that when our life is so bad, I mean, we just feel crushed by what we're dealing with. We feel like we're drowning in our adversity. What a tremendous uplift it is to us to know that though our life is bad, God is good, and he's really, really, really good. One of the interesting things about characteristics of deity mentioned in the Bible, they are often modified to inflate that characteristic. How about the word, dropping down to verse 21, kindness or mercy? What's the modifier? Marvelous! It's one thing to be kind. It's another thing to be marvelously kind. And God is always that way. Nahum 1 verse 7 says, the Lord is good, and he's always that way. There's never an exception. No matter how bad your life is, no matter how awful, how gut-wrenching your circumstances are, God is good. The Lord is good and a stronghold in day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. James chapter 1 says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation nor shadow cast by turning. God is constantly the giver of good things. Why do bad things happen? Do you really believe? And this was brought to my attention only a couple of years ago. And boy, when I heard him say this, I thought, oh, that could be a real weak spot in our personal lives and in the Lord's church. He asked this question: do we really believe in the devil? Do we believe that there's a force at work in our world nowhere near as powerful as God? God is sovereign over everything. Do we really believe there's a devil? Whenever something bad happens, people sometimes are inclined or tempted to blame God. When have you ever had somebody go through a gut-wrenching experience in their life? I mean, something they hated to go through, something they would not wish on their worst enemy, and they have just been in misery. When was the last time you ever heard somebody say, I hate the devil? I hate what he's doing to me in my life. When was the last time you ever heard somebody say that? Mike? My wife, Mike says. Mike came here from Adairsville, Georgia. And Mike, explain what happened to your wife.
Well, she had breast cancer at 17, and it was clear.
Breast cancer in 2017, and then it was cleared up.
Cleared up, and then around 21, right after the COVID shot, it came back, and it came back as a breast bone. So for about 2.5 years, and she passed away this past January. She fought on it. But she had had many surgeries of her neck, of her back. She couldn't wear shoes anymore with neuropathy in her feet. So she wore flip-flops all the time, and they would catch on things.
Mm-hmm.
And she would say, the devil is in my way, and I am not going to let him win.
Oh man, that is awesome. That is tremendous. What a great reaction of faith to an awful time in life. 2021, you said? Back.
It came back in
20 and passed away this past January. If you don't think the devil is working in your life, you are naive and more vulnerable because of that perspective. You let your guard down. You let your guard down and you get to the point where you don't believe that Satan is working in your life, and you are fresh meat for the devil. And he smells fresh meat. We better get our game face on. And we better realize that we are living in spiritual warfare. And that spiritual warfare is all around us, and it's also inside of us. You can't get away from it. Even if you could separate yourself from the spiritual warfare around you, the spiritual warfare still goes on inside of you. Where do you think sin comes from? James chapter 1 says. It comes from these desires. These desires that we have that sometimes are not checked. And then that gives birth to sin. There's spiritual warfare going on inside of us. There's spiritual warfare going around us. The devil is all about bringing you down, challenging you, and causing you to lose your faith. Job is not the only person in human history who has ever been attacked by the devil. And God permits that. And what an inspirational story Mike's wife is. As you heard her story, not only do these storms in our life give us an opportunity to build our faith in our struggle in the storm and our more passionately seeking God in our sense of desperation, but that life story of that time in our life becomes somebody else's inspiration to get through their very difficult time in their life. There's a reason why God permits the ugly, awful things in our life. None of the awful, ugly things in our life can stop us from getting to heaven unless we let them. We need to remember the goodness of God in the badness of our life. And it's really hard for some of us to wait. In some translations, it says hope in the Lord at this point. Look at the last two verses of the psalm. Oh, love the Lord, all of his saints, for the Lord preserves the faithful and fully repays the proud person. Be of good courage, he shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Or wait on the Lord. I'm curious, those of you who go to church here, do you ever sing that song, Teach Me, Lord, to Wait? Why would we need to sing that song? It is an educational experience. It is a reminder that cultivating the ability to wait on the Lord doesn't come natural. You don't go to CVS and get a prescription to get better patience with the Lord. There are times in our lives where we have to realize we're in the Lord's waiting room and we need to wait on him. Now, when you go out to a restaurant and a waiter or a waitress comes to your table, what do? They serve. Waiting on the Lord means you keep serving the Lord. You keep trusting in the Lord. You keep remembering his goodness. You keep being devoted to him. Even when your heart is hurting, when you don't understand, when especially you want to know why, and you wonder how long this is going to go on, we need to realize that sometimes we're in the Lord's waiting room, and there's great value in being in the Lord's waiting room. Why are eggs in an incubator? What if you were to take the eggs out before their time? What about that critter that is in the cocoon? What if you were to open that cocoon prior to its time? There's a reason why sometimes things are the way they are, and they need to be that way for a while. But boy, it can be really hard to deal with that. But we need to keep waiting on the Lord. I call it a Hobby Lobby verse in the Bible. It's the last verse in Isaiah 40. I call it Hobby Lobby verse because it's something you'd find on this home interior stuff at a place like Hobby Lobby. Isaiah 40:31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be faint. What people? Those who wait on the Lord. You know, a lot of times we read passages and we take them out of context and don't fully appreciate them. I'm going to ask you to go back to or listen to verse 21 of this chapter in Isaiah 40. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings princes to nothing. He makes the judges of earth useless. What's He informing us about? What's He reminding us about? There is an awesome God in heaven. And then notice verse 28. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak. To those who have no might, He increases strength. Even the youths, notice, even the youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall utterly fall. But, see, that last verse is connected with the previous section in the chapter. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagle. They shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be faint. Waiting on the Lord. Keep serving. Keep being faithful to the Lord, even when you don't understand. Old brother Charles Hodge, who's gone on to his reward, he said it right when he said, faith doesn't give us all the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers. And yes, we may have to live without answers. We're going to cue up a song that's going to be played, and I want to ask you to listen to this song, just a portion of it. And I want to finish the class in this way. Listen to the lyrics.
Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name. When found in the desert place, though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I turn back to praise.
Now listen carefully.
When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed
heard this song until after my wife died. I went to my 3 daughters and I said, girls, could you pick out 2 or 3 songs that we could play at your mother's memorial service? And one of my daughters picked out this song. And I remember sitting at her memorial service, about the tears streaming down my cheeks, hearing this song. But the lyrics of this song are what we need to implant in us so that when good things are experienced, we praise the Lord, and then when the ugliness surfaces, we keep praising the Lord because He's still good and deserving of praise. Do not let what the devil brings into your life cause you to lose your faith or cause you to become more distant relationally to the Lord. Use everything that He's doing in your life and turn it around as the very tool you use to grow closer to God in your sense of desperation because you feel such a need for help. That's what we ought to do when we're overwhelmed. Thank you very much for participating in class this morning.